All right, welcome everyone. I think we'll have some people joining in as we're getting started here, but I wanted to go ahead and start on time to respect those of you who are here. Um, I'm Kristen Brandt, the Arts Industry Director at the Mississippi Arts Commission, and as part of the portfolio of grants that I manage, I work with our writers across the state. And one thing that I have consistently heard is that we would it would be great for us to provide workshops or materials on how to get published and what that process looks like. And at, I think, last year's book festival, maybe even the year before last, Lisa gave me one of these infographics from the University Press of Mississippi called The Process of the Book. Um, and I've held on to it all this time because it's such a great little tool. And Lisa is here to lead the workshop for the process of the book as part of our Ask a Professional series. Lisa earned her bachelor's and master's in English from Mississippi State University and an MFA from Florida State University. And after teaching English at the college level for 5 years, she secured the McRae Publishing Internship at the University Press of Mississippi, where she's worked since 2015. Her publishing specialties include works in the field of biography, ethnomusicology, comic books, Caribbean studies, history, and media. Lisa's also a talented illustrator and graphic designer if you want to check her out. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And I'll turn the reins over to Lisa. And if you'd like to, you can go into the chat or the Q&A function to reach out during the session, but we will have some time for questions at the end.
Awesome. Sorry, I don't know why if anybody can see my Microsoft Teams chats popping up. I apologize in advance. Hopefully they're not
see the presentation.
Perfect, because they keep popping up on my screen. Hi, I'm Lisa. I've worked at the University Press of Mississippi, UPM, as Kristen said, since 2015. And I apologize if you could hear my corgi bark in the background. She very much wants to be a part of this today. I started as an intern and I've kind of worked my way up. I'm now an acquisitions editor, and I acquire a number of titles per year. And in a number of fields, all of which are outlined on our website. Those fields are sometimes shifting, so it's always good to go check out what each editor acquires. So I'm going to talk to you today about different types of publishing, finding the right publisher, and then what that process looks like. So I'm going to walk you through some slides and make sure I'm on my screen. Perfect. So this is just our little agenda that can kind of outline what we're going to go over. But first up, we're going to talk about finding the right publisher. So the first step you want to do is define your genre or your audience. Who are you writing this book to? You know, is it fiction or nonfiction? At the University Press, we primarily publish nonfiction. I say primarily, we only publish nonfiction. We no longer publish fiction. Other university presses, some others do. But you have to know like what kind of book you're writing. If you're writing a book about comic studies, I'm probably your girl. If you're writing, you know, a sci-fi mystery, you want to find the right publisher for that. And then you want to know your audience too, who they are, typically like their age range, their interests, how they read. And then this will help you find publishers that are going to reach those audiences as well. So that can help as you consider who you want to publish with. The most important step then is researching potential publishers. You can use resources like the Writers Market or Publishers Marketplace to find listing of publishers. We all typically know the big 5 commercial publishers like Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Hachette, Simon & Schuster, and I always forget the 5th. You know, there's always, what am I forgetting? I'll remember it in 20 minutes. And then you can do online research as well by visiting publisher websites, reading their submission guidelines, looking over the types of books they publish. This is especially important in commercial publishing with imprints. And you want to look at which imprint publishes what, because it's often defined by genre. You can attend literary events like the Mississippi Book Festival is probably the best thing to do in the state. And that's coming up in a couple of months. So in September, we hope to see you there. But you can also go to writing conferences, you can go to workshops, you can go to events like this that the Arts Commission has wonderfully put on to learn about different types of publishers and the books that they publish, and also network. Networking is really helpful if it's possible to do so. And then the easiest thing is probably just to visit your local bookstore, go to Lemuria, go to Square Books. Mississippi has some of the best local bookstores in the South. So you can visit those or visit libraries and look for books like yours. What kinds of book what kind of book are you writing? Do you see that already kind of being published? Go check out your own library, go look at your bookshelf and see who published that book. What do they look like? What does the cover look like? What is the length like? How much do they cost? How does your book fit into the market that is there for it? That is such an important part of the research process for finding a potential publisher. I cannot emphasize enough that just looking at the books that you like and finding who published them can be such a helpful tool to find out who you want to approach with your project. This is helpful for commercial publishing, which I'll get to in a minute, but it's also helpful with academic publishing because different academic publishers publish in different fields. So knowing who publishes what is really, really helpful. And that can just be found just by, looking at the spine of your favorite books. Consider literary agents. So this is not necessary for all types of publishing, but it's primarily useful if you are writing fiction. Agents are often necessary for getting your work into larger commercial publishers. They don't often accept non-agented submissions. So look at the website to see if that's a necessary requirement for the publisher that you're hoping to publish with. You can find different agents listed on Guide to Literary Agents or the Association of Author Representatives, and find out different places to find an agent who fits your work. And that's the same with going with a publisher. You want to look at what agents represent, who they represent. Would you fit in with their other clients? Would they fit with you? You can also look at, just like looking at the spine of a book for the publisher, you can look at the acknowledgments page for your book, for your favorite books, and see if they thank their agent. That can be an easy little tip to do that research with stuff you already have in your own home. Preparing your submission is a big part of submitting your book for publication. The most important thing to do is follow the guidelines. Every press is going to have different guidelines for what they accept. So some presses are going to say they only accept submissions through agents. So you want to make sure that you're aware of that. Some guidelines will specify what exactly they want in the submission, and you want to make sure that you're submitting those materials. I'll go over what a typical UPM guideline submission packet looks like a little bit later, but just kind of keep in mind that when you're submitting your material to be published, check the website of the publisher to make sure you're following all of those guidelines. And you also want to tailor your approach a little bit with each submission, primarily in your cover letter, to talk about why you're interested in publishing with them, how your book might be a good fit for them, and really explain why you want to work with them and why they should want to work with you. The big one is to be patient and persistent. Keep aware of the industry, what's happening, what trends are happening that might help inform how you submit your work, but also expect rejections. It's a part of being a writer. It's a part of being an artist in any way, is that you're going to get rejected. Publishers get a lot of submissions on a rolling basis, and it's just a part of the process. And you have to keep trying. Don't be discouraged when you get those rejections. Every publisher is going to be a little bit different. They're going to want different things, and you want to make sure that you don't get discouraged know your work, know how good your own work is, make sure you're trying to sell your work, but also push through. You're going to get a lot of rejections. That's just a part of the process, unfortunately. And you know, it takes time. So, all right. So there's four primary different types of publishing, and I think this is also really, really useful to think about how you're submitting your work and to whom you are submitting your work. So primarily we're looking at self-publishing, hybrid publishing, which is kind of a combination of self-publishing and commercial publishing, academic publishing, which I work in, and then commercial or traditional publishing, which is what we often think about when we think about publishing. So self-publishing, you can control pretty much every part of the process, which is a big plus for a lot of people. You retain all of the control of your content, the rights, the design, the marketing. You decide exactly what your book looks like, how it's read, how it's sold. You get to decide all of that. That can be a great benefit and it can be terrifying. So with all of that control comes cost. You have to pay for your own work for editing and design and formatting if you can't do it yourself. So depending on what services you use, that cost can be not insignificant. You do get a higher profit margin, 70% or more royalties for books on Amazon Kindle, which is a great plus if you want to have control of money. But while you can be online quite often, especially with Amazon, which is one of the biggest self-publishing companies, we don't often see self-published books in bookstores and libraries. So that's a big downside that you want to consider when you're thinking about self-publishing versus more traditional publishing. Again, you're in charge of all of the marketing promotion. This can be a great thing for some people who are super, super active within marketing and want to do that work themselves. But it can also be incredibly daunting if you don't have a lot of experience in marketing. And then finally, you also want to think about perception of self-publishing, quality of self-publishing. This varies really widely. And while there is a stigma attached to self-publishing, it's gotten a lot better over time, and the high quality work can be produced in self-published material. It just takes a lot of effort from the author's point of view. The most important thing I would like to stress about self-publishing is time. If you want to book fast, if you have like a specific deadline that you want to meet, and it's within, you know, a year or two, self-publishing may be the best venue for you because you can get a book online to your friends, to your family, pretty much as fast as you want, which is great if you want to get something published immediately. Hybrid publishing kind of does a little bit of what self-publishing does. It varies even more widely, I think, than self-publishing because it's a little bit of a no man's land to figure out what hybrid publishers are reputable and which aren't. There is a shared investment where the press will provide some professional services like editing or design, some marketing depending on the press, and the author gets to retain a lot of rights, gets higher royalties as well. The time can really vary. Again, it's a much faster timeline to get published, but again, you've got questions of quality and reputation. You want to make sure you really do your research in finding the right hybrid press for you. So this is the perfect solution if you want to self-publish, but you're a little bit afraid of some of the legwork that comes along with self-publishing. Academic publishing, which is what I work in, so I have the most experience with academic publishing. It's more similar to traditional or commercial publishing, and that it's all done by the press, right? So all of the design, the marketing, the copy editing, all of that work is done by the press. One of the key facets of academic publishing is peer review. All of the books that we publish go through rigorous peer review, which takes time. But because we primarily publish academic volumes, we want to make sure that experts are reading and commenting on this work, and that there is an academic kind of dialogue happening within the review process. This is a really important part of academic publishing, and you'll see it at all university presses. They all do peer review, and it's a big part of our identity. If you're publishing academic work, credibility and prestige is a big part of academic publishing. You want to find the right publisher for you, what they publish in, what they're really known for. One of the things we're best known for is comic studies. We've been doing it for, I think, 30 years. It's been a really long time.
I've always known University Press to be excellent for folklore studies and
Yes.
ethnomusicology as well, because so many of the books I read in my MA for folklore were published by UPM.
Absolutely. We have a huge folklore list, and it's one of the conferences that we attend constantly. We're winning a lot of awards in folklore. So I want to congratulate my fellow editors for the hard, important work they've been doing in folklore studies. So yeah, there's different fields that we excel in, or that we publish in and have been publishing in for a really long time. And that's true with all academic presses. They'll all have their specialties, and you want to find what specialty suits your work the best. A thing to note about academic publishers is that while we often target students, professors, libraries, and we have regional books, which we see often in regional bookstores. Like if you go to Lemuria, they have an entire UPM section. But there is some limited market reach when it comes to national bookstores. So you'll go into a Barnes & Noble here, for example, and you may see some of our books. But if you go to a Barnes & Noble in Iowa, for example, you may not see any UPM books. And so that's true for a lot of academic presses when you consider your audience and your reach. Funding and costs. Typically, we don't require any cost from the author, unlike self-publishing or hybrid publishing. Some academic publishers may require some production cost subventions, which we seek usually from the supporting university. And this can offset books with a lot of images or color. So any art books or photography books, those will sometimes have some author support. A big thing to keep in mind about academic publishing is the nonfiction versus fiction. If you're publishing fiction, most university presses don't publish that. There's a couple that do, including LSU, Georgia, Iowa. Those are some of the bigger ones. But I recommend going to aupresses.org. And I've put the link into the presentation so you can kind of type that up. And that there's a really, really helpful area grid that outlines what every press publishes in. It's a very large document, so it can be overwhelming, but it can tell you which presses will publish in which fields, and that can really help you find a starting point, at least, for who to submit your work to. And then finally, time. Unlike self-publishing or hybrid publishing, time is very much a part of academic publishing, and it can take a long time, especially because of peer review on the front end. It can take months or even years, depending on the project. And so I would think to say that academic publishing takes a little bit longer than most other types of publishing. And then finally, your commercial or your traditional publishing. So these are what you think about when you think of Penguin Random House, right? These are the big ones. But because of their size, they often require agents or other people to kind of help you get your work in front of editors. So networking is a huge part of this. Literary agents is a big part of this. And getting a book deal can be really, really competitive. Because of that, you can get advances, which can be quite large, but royalties, of course, are smaller than self-publishing. Academic publishing kind of sits in the middle somewhere. Lots of professional support for commercial publishing. You do lose some control of the work. The author can require you, the press can require you to change the title or the design. There's a lot more input in the text. So you do have to give up some control. Size is a big part of presses, of commercial presses. So you have the big houses that have huge networks, but can be really difficult to get your work in front of. And then you have smaller or independent publishers who have some limited marketing or distribution, but can be much more easy to approach. And especially if you have a regional project, they can be very helpful to reach a local or a regional market. So we have a number of presses in the state that are kind of independent commercial publishers that can be really tap into a regional community. And then you have your time to market. It can be some amount of time from acceptance to publication, typically a little bit faster than academic publishing. So you can consider a lot in terms of what kind of publisher you want to submit your work to. And there's a lot of variety within these different types of publishers, but those are kind of the broad strokes, right? But the biggest things to consider: researching, thoroughly research who you're going to submit your work to, look at published books. If you can, look at a contract. Sometimes that's easier said than done. You may be able to find some of that online. Understanding costs and time, how much cost you might or might not have to contribute to the process, and how much time it takes. That's a really big consideration for publishing. What the distribution is like. So do you want a book that has a more regional distribution? Do you want to reach international markets? Do you want to reach scholars? That's a big question. A little bit later on is the contract clarity. So you want to think about rights, you want to think about royalties. And then, what are your goals? Who are you trying to reach? What do you want to do with your book? And what kind of book are you trying to publish? So those are the big considerations for who to submit your work to. All right, so you've got your book, right? Once you have a book ready to be published, either you've submitted it and it's been accepted, or you're still in the submission process, or you're just writing. You don't even have to have a book to be considered a writer. Keep that in mind. You are a writer if you are writing. But you have to promote yourself regardless of who you publish with. You can have a major publisher who's promoting a lot of the book, but you still can promote yourself. So the first biggest thing is create an online presence. Play to your strengths for this one. If you are naturally averse to being online, this is not going to work as well for you. But I do recommend creating an author website that gives a little bit of information about yourself. And this is especially helpful for sharing events or any kind of travel that you're doing to promote the book. This can be a great place to contain all of that information. Social media. You can obviously go to some of the standards like Twitter or Facebook. If you want to reach a younger audience, you can go for Instagram or TikTok. If you want to, you really want to look at where your audience is engaged and think about how you're using that platform to reach them. You can also do something like an email newsletter and like update people, especially if it's a community-based book and you have a community already kind of built into the process. Which obviously engage your community. This is a huge part of publishing, especially for regional projects, which I work a lot on in our biography and memoir list. But just in general, you're going to want a community of readers. You want them to kind of buy into the process, right? So you can organize a book launch to generate excitement for the project. You can network with other authors via either online or in person at conferences. AWP, which is the Association of American Writers Program, and it's been a long time since I've been there, is a really great place to network and also see different panels of different writers.
AWP is a great conference. It's really one of the most prestigious ones in the country. And
Yes.
every year I get grants from our mini grant program to send writers to AWP. So if this is something that you'd be interested in doing, we do have a grant to support your registration, travel, accommodations while you're there, all that kind of stuff.
That is incredible. I didn't know that. So I'm so thrilled to hear it, because it is not only is it incredibly helpful for networking, it's just a really fun conference. And you get to see some incredible writers as the keynote speakers. So I've seen and gotten books signed by authors that I have long since admired. So it's a really special event if you are able to go.
And there are book fairs, festivals, and conferences for every genre of writing. There's a murder conference that happens in Nashville. I was yesterday at the Children's Book Conference at the University of Southern Mississippi here in Mississippi at Hattiesburg. So there's lots of options out there if you really want to target your niche.
Absolutely. And so yeah, from academic conferences to genre conferences to big writing conferences, there's a space for literally everyone in the writing community to meet readers and other authors alike. And then finally, your local community, right? Get in touch with book clubs in your area. Go to the bookstores that you like and that you want to see your work in. To arrange readings or signings. Obviously, Lemuria has some of the best readings and signings around, same with Square Books, but that's true across the state. There are so many great events going on at your local bookstore and library. And then you can kind of use those to help generate press for your book and also meet people. All right. You can also, through some of that networking, you can guest blog. We occasionally feature some of our authors on our blog talking about maybe their book, or if we have a big film studies list. So they'll talk about films or comics or whatever kind of subject that we think would be relevant to promoting their work. Podcasts are a big part of some of the promotion for different types of books. There are podcasts for everything. So, don't be shy. Reach out to a podcaster that you like and see if they might be willing to feature your book or a conversation about you in the writing process, or even personal stories about you. And then, write any articles or blog posts of your own. If you start a blog, that could be very helpful. Host webinars. TikTok is a fun way to create videos and share them with different followers. And it can help get your name out there. This is sometimes more than promoting you. I mean, more than promoting your book, it's promoting you as the expert in whatever you're writing about. A big part of promoting yourself is reviews and endorsements. So Goodreads, we obviously all know about Goodreads. It's a really helpful tool to promoting work. So seeking reviews on these kinds of platforms, you can do giveaways. You can just be active on these platforms to help readers become aware of your work. You can also consider paid promotions through these kinds of things, through these platforms, or from Amazon or Google, or Twitter ads or Instagram ads. Same thing with book promotion sites. And then finally, you can also seek blurbs for your book. These are the things that are on the back of the book, but also listed on Amazon or wherever third-party bookseller. It's from people that you think would be good readers of your book, that would be good speakers for your book. And you can reach out to them and ask them if they'd be willing to provide a blurb. Sometimes this work is done by the press, and sometimes this work can be done by the author. So that's something you want to kind of touch base with your particular editor about, on whose job that is to reach out for endorsements. But they can be very helpful. And then also finally, just kind of keep aware of what you're doing and then be willing to adjust that process. So if you're doing a lot of paid promotions, for example, and they're not working, adjust that process. If you are doing TikTok videos every day and they're working a lot to generate conversion rates and sell books, that's great. Keep doing that. So keep aware of what you're doing, kind of track that progress, and then figure out what works and what doesn't. So some of this, especially in 2024, especially as technology changes more and more, you'll want to be willing to adjust how you approach different audiences, because it's going to change fast and frequently. And then so finally, this is the illustration that Kristen talked about at the very beginning, that I'm just going to outline what the typical process of a book looks like. This is going to change a little bit depending on what type of publisher you use. So if you're self-publishing, this is going to look radically different. And if you're commercial publishing, it's going to look a little bit different. So this is true to academic publishing, specifically to UPM. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of it and the things that you can expect for what a book publishing, like what publishing a book actually looks like. So the first step, and I think this is true across the board, is submitting a proposal. So after you've done all the research, after you've found which press you want to work with, you want to send them a proposal packet. So for us, that includes an overview of your project and preferably a sample chapter. For different presses, it might look a little bit different depending on what their website guidelines tell you to submit in that packet. Again, I cannot stress enough, look at the website and adhere to the proposal guidelines. That is the quickest way to make sure that you're giving them everything that they need to do a faster review. Once we receive a proposal, we look that proposal over. I look at it myself, and then I will discuss it with my colleagues in acquisitions, in marketing, and in design. And we'll all talk about whether or not a project is a good fit for us, if it, how it fits within our publishing program, any concerns that we have with it, any questions that we have with it. And then we'll decide in that meeting whether or not we want to pursue publication. This is a really generative meeting, and it's very helpful for us to kind of think about the future of the press, but also for us to decide what our publishing program is going to look like in 2 years. Once we decide to pursue a manuscript, we'll reach out to the writer and say, we'd love to work with you. Once you're ready, submit that full manuscript. That full manuscript can take a week between us asking for it and us receiving it, and it can take 2 years. It just depends on the process. It depends on the book, and it depends on the writer. So that's something to keep in mind too with a proposal, which is what is your anticipated timeline for sending the full manuscript. Because we submit books for review, we want to have that full manuscript to get the best peer review possible. So once we have the full manuscript, we send the book out to peer review. This goes to 2 readers at a time, and we try to find experts in the field who can comment on the quality of the writing, but also the content, how the book's arguments work. Are there any holes in the arguments? Are there any places that the writer could explore an idea more thoroughly, could use additional resources or reading? Is there anything that like organizationally doesn't work? It can be a really, really helpful process. So if you're doing fiction, for example, this would be more akin to, this would be akin to kind of the beta reader process, which is, sometimes that can mean like workshopping a book and getting feedback in that workshop, or getting feedback from other writers who have a system set up to get someone else to read a book and give you ideas on it. So this is the feedback stage. And this process can take a number of months. It really depends on the project, it depends on the timeline, and it depends on how much peer review a book needs. So we'll review a book until we feel that it's as strong as possible. And then once we have some good peer review to take to our board, we'll go to our board for approval. So Mississippi, University Press in Mississippi is a consortium press, which is kind of unique. There's only a handful of them in the country, and it just means that we are supported by all 8 state universities in Mississippi rather than just one, which is really, really important for us to make sure that we're representing to the entire state. I think that's such a key part of our mission. So our board is comprised of 2 members from each of our supporting universities, as well as a number of people from IHL. And so they approve all of the projects that we present to them. And once we have board approval, we can kind of move forward to the production stage. Somewhere in this process, the contract happens. Sometimes it happens early and sometimes it happens after peer review. It just depends on the project, how well it fits within what we're doing, and how positive we feel about the work being a good fit for us. After all of that is done, after the book is board approved, we'll ask for the final manuscript. So this is the final clean manuscript with all edits finalized, with everything done. If you have images, you might need permission for that, which is a fun thing that people don't realize they have to ask for. If they have images in their book, depending on what the images are, you might have to ask permission for them, which can be a lengthy process. So you'll want to check with your editor early on in the process if you have images, or if you have extensive quotes from other books, or poetry, which is a very complicated matter when including in a book, or anything that might require a third party to grant rights to. So we'll have all of that taken care of at the final manuscript stage. And before we can move to production, we need everything finalized. So step 8 is the launch meeting, which sounds like fun. And I had to tell someone recently that unfortunately it is an internal meeting, which is it would be a fun, interesting way to do it as an external meeting. But in this meeting, we present a book to our full staff. So this is often when marketing really knows that a book is real and it's coming down the pipeline to them, to get prepared to start, writing copy, doing metadata for it, sending it out to third-party websites like Amazon, really starting social media promotion. All of that kind of work starts then. So we'll send that book to production right before or after that launch meeting. The cover is created at that time. Our covers are created with feedback from the authors. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier with commercial publishing is you don't have a lot of control over the product. With academic publishing, you'll have, depending on the press, you can have some control over what that final cover looks like. And that's really important to some people. So it's a consideration to make as you're considering where to publish. We do copy editing, typesetting, and design. The author does not have to do any of that. And then we will send the page proofs to the author for any indexing or endorsement requests. While all of that is happening, marketing is busy, busy, busy. They're creating the metadata to do all of these things, and all the promotion begins. And then after a number of months, the book is printed and shipped and goes to our warehouse and becomes a real live book. And once it's published, we send it out to the author, we send it out to reviewers, we send it to bookstores and to websites to stock, and promotion really continues with reviews, awards. If you're doing an academic book, we'll do course adoption, which means we'll send it to different universities and say, do you want to teach a class on this? We'll schedule events and signings with our publicist. There's a lot that happens pretty much at every single stage of the book process. And this illustration, while unique to University Press in Mississippi, is applicable to a lot of different university presses. So that process looks similar and can be applied in a lot of ways to commercial publishing. And so finally, for us, at least, a successful submission packet, and I think this is probably true for a lot of academic presses, includes a resume or a CV, a cover letter, which kind of outlines the anticipated length of the manuscript. And I will say length is something that is an important consideration for publishing. Look at how long the books that you like are, and look at how long the books that are being published are. If it's too short or if it's too long, that's potentially a problem with a publisher. We really like to publish manuscripts between 70 and 90,000 words. We found that's just the best length in terms of word count for different kinds of publishing, in terms of what readers pick up, in terms of what sells. And also, if a book is over a certain word count, it can be costly to produce. We don't share that cost with the author, but those costs do have to be passed on to the reader. And so that's a consideration for how long is your book? How long is it going to take for you to write the book? Are there any illustrations? Is this book being simultaneously submitted? That's something you want to check if your press allows that. Some presses say, please do not submit a book to multiple presses at a time for consideration, and some presses are fine with it. You just want to make sure that if there is something that says you shouldn't do that, to make sure that you're only submitting that project to that press. So again, reading those guidelines for submission can be so, so important. And then we ask for an overview of how your work fits within literature, any competing titles, any target audience, and the names of a couple of potential reviewers for the peer review process.
So, Lisa, I do have a
Yes.
question in the chat here. So, does a book need to be completed in order to send out the proposal? At one point, should you be finished writing the book?
So that's a really good question. And the answer is, and I think this is true for both academic publishing and commercial publishing, it does not have to be complete. I often field inquiries or proposals from interested writers for books that are in the process of being completed. And so they'll either have, I typically say, as long as you have a sample chapter or so I can get a feel for your writing, that's okay. You don't need to have the full manuscript completed at that time. However, that work will need to be done, and hopefully in a reasonable amount of time. And that largely happens with the author doing it kind of on their own time, right? For academic press, at least. It gets a little bit different with commercial publishing in terms of how much developmental editing happens with the editor at the early stage of the process. And I advise to check on what different presses do and what different editors do. But at least for us, and I think this is true largely across the board, is no, the manuscript does not need to be complete at the time. And it can be a good time to submit a proposal early to get an idea of, is this going to work? Is this going to be a manuscript that's going to fit? And do we have any questions about potential concerns of, is your subject too broad or too narrow, or adjustments that you might want to make to the text? So that's a long answer to, it does not need to be completed at the time of submission for the proposal. And that was perfect, because that was the end of my vast amount of information. So I'm happy to kind of turn it over to the Q&A for any questions.
Sure. So I wondered if we could go back to the process infographic slide.
Yes.
So we had a question from John Palermo in the chat about how this differs from a traditional publisher. And looking at the university press, I think you cut out the peer review. The proposal process is similar, but it's going to vary press to press. I've seen people request USBs of manuscripts be mailed in. I've seen, people want it as an email attachment, or if people want a full printed copy, which is a little less common nowadays, since that is expensive to ship. And
I would say we prefer email. It's just, or, some people will send us a Dropbox link or whatever. Some presses will only accept, and I think this has gone the way of the dinosaurs, right? I don't think it exists too much anymore, but some presses will only accept physical submissions, and some will only accept digital submissions, and some require submissions to come through websites like Submittable. So it just depends on the press as well, on how you submit that work.
And then a lot of the rest of it's going to be very similar to traditional publishing.
And I would say, at least with the larger commercial presses, a big part that is kind of missed here is the work of the agent, right? Is that the agent, you'll hand your material to your agent, and the agent will pitch the book. We do work with agents occasionally, and it just varies depending on the project and more depending on the field. And agents can be really, really helpful. They do cost money, and it depends why, and I see that's one of the questions in the Q&A, but it varies so wildly depending on who the agent is, what kind of agency they're at, that how much they cost. So I can't really give you a good answer for that question, and it's just going to be doing some research to finding the right agent for you and finding out how much they cost. But an agent can be really beneficial to help you negotiate contracts and to help pitch your work. So this process doesn't outline the pitching process that comes from agents, that they'll do some of that legwork for you, right? They have contacts at publishers that they'll be able to reach out to and get a work to them directly. And then the kind of book deal gets signed much more early on within an agent pitch. So it's a little bit different in that. I think the back end is probably pretty similar across the board in terms of traditional publishers doing the promotion work, doing the copy editing, the design, all of that work in the back end. So it's just it's going to differ a little bit in the front end, but you'll still have to do a lot of the editing work. And I think we're starting to see a lot of big commercial or traditional publishers not do so much developmental editing that we consider, like typically think about when we consider traditional publishing. And so they might recommend you find a developmental editor for yourself if you want that kind of work. And that's someone who can develop the type of writing or the writing that you're trying to do. And there are different websites that you can use to find a good developmental editor for you. And sometimes they might have recommendations as well.
So as far as researching your book's topic and kind of determining the marketability of your book and kind of navigating where you would be in that position, is it wise to do research into that kind of generic field before even writing, or should you write it first and then navigate the publication? I mean, I think people do it in a variety of ways, because these books just kind of explode out of people on occasion.
Yeah. So I think you can do both. And I'll kind of outline the pros and cons of doing both. So the first thing to redo the research before writing the book can be helpful in figuring out ways to differentiate the work that you want to do from what's already been published or being published. And that can be helpful depending on the type of book that you're writing, right? But if you're, for example, an expert in a very specific type of field and you have a project that you've been working on for a number of years, or you're one of those people who just sat down and wrote the book, which is an absolutely valid way of writing a book, when you do that research on the back end, you can also kind of do that work to say, okay, this is how my book is different, right? Because you're not going to write the exact same book that's already been published. Find ways to both either researching before or after you've written the book, find ways to articulate how your book stands out, right? What is it doing that's new in the field? What is it addressing a different audience, for example? Is it representing a different type of story? That cover letter can do a lot of that work to outline how your book is different, because you're trying to sell it to the author, to the editor who may have seen that type of book before. And I will say, sometimes don't worry a lot about it, because we'll see trends in publishing where we'll get the same type of book over and over again, and there's no way they would have known that we're seeing that book like in a variety of different kinds of ways. And it would just be something in the air that creates, that we were seeing this type of book being published simultaneously across a couple of different presses. But really focus on what makes your book special and unique, and that can do a lot of that legwork for you.
All right. And we have another question here from a writer whose book is completed, edited, it's got a cover, copyright, and ISBN number. What's the next step for an author in that position? Is it finding an agent? And they did provide a category for that, which is inspiration.
Okay. Yeah. So before even finding an agent, think about who you want to publish your work, because you may not need an agent for that. If it's a press that you want to publish with that requires an agent, absolutely get an agent, and they can help you really navigate that. The only thing I do have a question for is, you've created all of this work. Are you willing to change it? If you're going to work through a more traditional publisher, they might want to change the cover. They might want to change the title. They may want to change some of the content, or ask you to do some editing. So the question is, how much are you willing to change or edit your book accordingly? And if the answer is you have all of this done, and you're feeling good about where the book is, self-publishing or hybrid publishing may be the avenue for you. So considering like how much control you want, because this is a lot of work that you've already done. What do you want? What kind of audience do you want to reach, and who, and can you reach that inspiration audience through a self-publisher or a hybrid publisher? And the answer may be yes, and that way you can go ahead and publish it immediately without an agent. So some of that research has to kind of be done on who you want to reach and how you want to reach them.
And we just had another couple questions pop up. When you find a publisher that wants to work with you, so it kind of asking about the responsibilities there. I think they do vary depending on the publisher who's responsible for the promotion of the book versus making book tour arrangements and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the author a lot, and the connections that each individual press has. So sometimes you can, you'll have a press that will take care of that completely. And sometimes they'll ask for a little bit more legwork done by the author, especially if you're in a location, if you're working with a regional publisher and you're in a location that that publisher doesn't have a lot of networking in. So for example, if you're publishing with UPM and you are living in Minnesota, for example, we might ask you to do some of the legwork on connecting us to the right bookstores. So it really depends on the publisher, and it depends on the book. But we try to do as much as we can to kind of make connections and promote the book for you. And this is especially helpful for distribution as well, that kind of promotion in terms of what the publisher does.
All right. And Julia wants to know, how do I know an agent isn't scamming me? And I think a lot of that is doing your research, looking that person up outside of the website that you might have found them on, and see if they have a consistent presence. And you can
Yes.
also look up their email address. You can Google email addresses, see if that's somewhere, see when it was created.
Absolutely. Talk to other people they may have represented can be helpful. So another networking kind of moment there. But yeah, also just anytime someone asks for a lot of money from you, that's always a red flag. You should just be wary about, you're going to have to pay for some things depending on how you want to publish your book. But if an agent's asking for a large sum of money, or something that just doesn't feel right, that may be a red flag. And you might want to reach out to some other people to see if they've had similar experiences.
I would delete their email address if they ask you for your social security number.
Yes.
Uh,
Though for peer review, we do ask for that for payment. So it's a whole thing. But
yeah, it is different when the press is asking you for stuff.
yeah. When it's an agent, it's a little bit of a red flag.
So I think we got time for one last question here. And I'm gonna kind of wrap something into it. So one, if you're amenable to this, I can make your slides available.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So yes, we'll make that available on the website under the recorded video for this session. Our final question is that having self-published a first book, this writer is now seeking representation for the second work, which is also a picture book, but wants to go through a traditional publisher this time around. Gone through a lot of agents and wants to know, what to do when you're not feeling like you have any traction.
And that's a tough spot to be in, right? Where you feel like you've got the thing, you've got the book, and it's now just trying to find the right home for it. So some of it is, be persistent and ask an agent if they reject you, if there's a reason that they are, is there something that you can do that can improve the book? They might not always answer, but it doesn't hurt to ask, to say like, why are you interested or not interested in working with me? In terms of trying to sell your reputation as a writer, you can also try to give them some numbers on, how did your first book do? Did it reach an audience? Did it perform in a way that they might want to see the second book perform? You know, how you did in terms of trying to reach the audience for that, and that might be the work that you're going to do with that second book. You also might want to emphasize the way that the first and second book are different. When it comes to trying to self-publish and then go into a traditional publishing route, where publishers can be a little wary of republishing what's already been published, because that means the work is already available, and so it kind of causes conflicts of interest. And so you can really differentiate those two different projects. But otherwise, go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and see if you're reaching out to the right kinds of people. And if there are any places that you could go that might help you get in touch with people who might be a better representative for your work. So Kristen mentioned the Kegler Book Festival and at USM, which is all about children's literature. It's a lot about children's literature studies, but it's a worthwhile kind of avenue for potentially reaching out to new people. Same thing, the Mississippi Book Festival always has panels on children's books. So you might want to go there and see and talk to them and see how they got published and who they reached out to. So some of that is trying to maybe reapproach how you're networking.
So, and again about the Kegler Festival, just a note, that was streamed and the recordings of their sessions are available. Wonderful illustrators, wonderful writers, and people who consume a lot of children's books, like elementary school teachers and librarians. So if that's something you'd be interested in, I would recommend checking them out. And there are a couple other children's book and picture book writers in the state that I could also help you connect with peer-to-peer. We're starting to run tight on time here, so I am going to turn off the recording. Where'd my part?